Hi, I'm Mina Malik Hussain, and this is The Coffee Table. And as always, today we've got a wonderful show lined up for you guys today. It's a serious one, and it's an issue that affects all of us personally in deep and meaningful ways and continues to do so. And it's something that it's a global phenomenon, right? So I'm not trying to keep in suspense. Today we're going to be talking about gender-based violence across the world and trying to unpack with our wonderful, accomplished, courageous guests, what is going on in the world? Why are we still thinking about the safety of women and vulnerable groups and children and minorities in such narrow ways? Why is violence around the world, violence against women and children and vulnerable groups has only increased, and it keeps increasing? COVID has exacerbated this. Where is all this hate coming from? Why do we continue to live in a world that should have been better by now, but just isn't? And it's a vast conversation. It's incredibly complex, but hopefully today we'll be able to kind of make a little dent in that conversation. And I am really, really excited to be welcoming three wonderful people who are deep in the trenches of this issue and doing such wonderful, meaningful, significant work to help make this world and this country a safer place for all of us. Our first guest is Salman Sufi, who is the founder of the Salman Sufi Foundation. He is an international public sector reforms and gender strategy specialist who is currently UN Women's senior advisor on gender equality to the government of Sindh. Our second guest is Haya Iman Zahid, barrister at law, who is the CEO of the legal empowerment NGO Legal Aid Society, which is based in Karachi, and is a member for Sindh for the National Commission on the Status of Women, and is also a member of the Sindh Police and Citizen Safety Commission. And our third guest is Amina Rahman, who is the program coordinator at Shirkat Gah Women's Resource Center. She specializes in issues relating to violence against women and girls and family law. She's got an MSc in evidence-based social intervention and policy evaluation from the University of Oxford. What a wonderful, distinguished guests. Welcome to the show, all three of you. This is tremendously exciting, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. So Haya, let's start with you. And when we talk about violence, and again, because you are a lawyer, what do we mean legally when we use the term violence? What all does that include?
Hi, Mina. Thank you so much for having me on this show. It's a true pleasure. I think we take a very broad spectrum of actions coupled with intent.
Right.
It covers psychological abuse, it covers physical abuse, it covers economic deprivation as well. And when we really speak about this growing trend of violence, as you said in your introduction, there are countless reports that indicate that 1 in 3 women worldwide will experience some form of either physical or sexual violence perpetrated against them by somebody known to them, that we call intimate partner violence.
Yes.
And many more will experience this in public spaces. Coming closer to home, there's a 2017 report by the Tribune which indicates that 70-odd% of women and girls had faced such violence perpetrated by someone known to them, but 93% had experienced some form of abuse, physical or sexual, in a public space. Right. So as you rightly said, this has been a pandemic much before the onset of COVID. But then with COVID coming about, things have intensified. And there's a lot of data out there from other countries such as Mexico, Argentina, indicating that lots more women are calling in on various helplines complaining about domestic violence. Closer to home, I can cite the example of the Sindh Legal Advisory Call Center, which is manned by the Law Department of the provincial government. In June 2020, we saw a significant rise in the number of women calling asking for help. So when you ask, the question of why is this happening, of course, it was the lockdown, socioeconomic deprivation, that frustration of perpetrators transcending and manifesting into this need to reassert power and control over their lives, and that really manifesting into various forms of violence. But when you move away from the contours of domestic violence, the question is, why is this happening? Why is the rickshaw driver abducting a woman and a daughter in broad daylight, raping her? Why is Minare-Pakistan happening? So we really need to be asking these questions.
Absolutely. And I think it's a very important distinction that you've made is that violence is of two kinds. So there's the public kind, and there is the intimate partner violence, which is the private kind. And both of those things are happening. And a lot of times I think that when people talk about violence, they think about public events, and they think about, like you said, the Mina Malik Hussain event, or we think about being out in public spaces that are unsafe for women, but a huge amount of violence is being committed in a private setting where so many people just don't know about it, and women are suffering in silence. And again, not just women, but kids and vulnerable groups. And I think this is where, Salman, maybe you can, chip in here and tell me that when we talk about gender-based violence, it's actually, I think, our sort of the first place our mind goes to is women. But that's simply not true, because gender-based violence is also a pretty vast kind of catch-all for violence happening.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me on your show. It's a very apt discussion to have, given the current atmosphere we have, especially in Pakistan, where unfortunately the violence, I wouldn't say the violence has spiked up, but the reporting has spiked up, which is a good sign that people are coming out and reporting it. So gender-based violence is absolutely, it's not just limited to one gender. And when we drafted the Punjab Protection of Women Against Violence Act, we made sure that it just not just like say that it's like, that women are the only, when women are being, not victim, but survivors, but it's not just by men, but it's by women also. So women are not just being targeted by men, but they're also being targeted by fellow women. So violence is like a very broad area which needs discussion. But unfortunately, in Pakistan and other countries, even West, the definition of violence has never been, discussed or explained the way the social in the society. It has not seeped through. So people still don't understand. And whenever they talk about gender-based violence, they only think that it's a man hitting a woman. But it's way more complicated and way more diverse than that. And I would like to just, say that unfortunately, because of the political climate of the country as well, and in which there have been some irresponsible statements. So that's why you see a spike of the violence that is happening, because when you are at a responsible place, when you are an official of the government, your words have to be measured before you speak them, because you may have some other intentions, but it's not necessary that the same intentions are being conveyed to the people, especially the people who are not as educated as you are.
I think that's an incredibly important point that you've raised, Salman, is that violence just doesn't happen in a vacuum. Right, and it's a very social construct. It's a very social thing, and society is what you and me and everybody else. And when we use our words irresponsibly, and we use social media in a cavalier way and in an incendiary way, it's not as simple as doing one tweet or saying something on Facebook or even coming on TV and saying something. It has reverberations through a lot of different kinds of strata of society, and they're all taking it in certain ways. So actually it really feels like it's a minefield that has to be carefully navigated so that you're not giving anybody the wrong idea. So it's disingenuous to say that, oh, it's just a tweet. Things snowball a lot. And Amina, maybe this is where you can come in, because you work with Shirkatgah, and Shirkatgah has done over decades of years. Shirkatgah has done so much incredible work with so many different kinds of segments of society. So tell me a little bit about how Shirkatgah works with women who come to Shirkatgah looking for help, and specifically women who are survivors of violence or ongoing violence, or sort of just they need help.
Yeah. So Shirkatgah, essentially, when we get people when we work with communities and we get women who come with us, cases, it's often like an idea of where do we go, right? Like we have this complaint, there's a counseling section, but where do we go? If we have legal aid, what should be our approach? What are safety nets that we can have or access? And so we sort of link them with that. So over the past 2 years, what we've sort of done is understanding, what at the local level really exists, and understanding that, when we talk about laws in the country and we talk about services in the country, there are initiatives that have been set up, both public and private, right? It's just that women do not have access to it or do not know what are those services available? So a lot of the work that Shirkat does is provide and linkage and resource towards this. And we've sort of developed an app now, which is called the Hum Kadam app, that does that. So we've mapped services and helplines at the national and provincial level that are already doing really good work and connecting women to have that at a click of a button. They can access those helplines depending on the issue. So not each helpline is a catch-all, right? So for instance, if you have a helpline or a service like the Digital Rights Foundation, they only deal with cases of, that pertain to online harassment, right? Whereas so similarly, other helplines help you in other situations. Some of those helplines are limited in terms of a geographical basis. Like for instance, LAS runs the helpline, so that's sort of based in Sindh. So people need to know where to go and how to go. So that's sort of what we are doing in terms of building that education and making sure that people know what is available so that there's more engagement with the state, right? And engagement with services so that we can improve those in the future. And, then we talk about reporting, and that is a very important thing when they are reporting and accessing. And also there is a feedback change, right? Like you have people coming up with issues and then the state has to respond to all those cases. So that's sort of the work that Shirkat is doing particularly.
No, that's fantastic. And Hum Kadam is a fantastic app. I just want to interrupt here and be like, Hum Kadam is an app that you can download on an Android device, and it's like one platform where you can get so much information about, like Amina's telling us about all these different avenues that you have and recourse to justice or reporting and different helplines and just a wealth of information. So if somebody who needs it, if you need it, Hum Kadam is an app that is wonderful, and please do. If you have an Android device, you can download it, and the information is there in English and in Urdu. So, if you can read either one of those languages, it'll help. Haya, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to come in on the helpline specifically. Yes. We at the Legal Aid Society are working in partnership with the government of Sindh for sustainability, of course, and there's true ownership. And we've been operating this legal advisory helpline since 2014, as Amina mentioned. It's not limited to Sindh. We receive calls from across Pakistan and even from Pakistanis that are experiencing violence or having women that have inheritance issues in Pakistan, etc. So we get calls from outside. So the novelty of this is that there is no middle person. A high court enrolled lawyer will pick up directly, and the quality assurance, because provincially you have different laws, right? So how can one helpline cater to any kind of legal matter, civil, criminal, anything, public service related? So we have retired Supreme Court judges that are present and that are assisting the lawyers in building their capacity. So that helpline has been functional throughout the course of suspensions, lockdowns, because the government recognized it as an essential service, which was very critical when they would come up with lockdown scenarios. Going back to Salman's point on social media and really the potency and power, I think the narrative is further amplified. The narrative of victim shaming and victim blaming. Why was she wearing this? Why was she there? She asked for it, and what could she have done to prevent this from happening? But it's really terrifying because social media will amplify these counter narratives, and we must address these fake news outlets that are the first to arrive at the scene, casting doubt. So what will happen is that the morale of the victim, full of so many challenges, you're demoralizing victims from reporting and coming forward. And secondly, you are going to adversely impact the investigations that are going in ongoing cases, right? So I just like to end by saying,
How does it affect cases that are under consideration? What's the word? Sub judice, yes. How does it affect cases that are sub judice, though?
Well, Mina, we all carry baggage with us, and I think the baggage is very evident. I've been part of countless, judges and police and prosecutor trainings where we've had to demystify an easy to understand concept of consent. That there needs to be consent even within the marital bond, where we've had to explain that a transgender can be raped, that a sex worker can also be raped. They're not asking for it,
Absolutely.
So when we talk about how will this counter narrative impact investigation, of course, it can cause further prejudice in a system that already has so much prejudice deeply entrenched within it in institutions, in the public sphere, and in the private setting as well.
Absolutely. And so tell me a little bit about these prejudices that you have encountered in your own work, because you've pioneered all these excellent programs, and I think one of my favorites is Women on Wheels, which is literally putting women, giving them transport and putting them into the public space and giving them this really great way to reclaim that space and to be able to get around, to be able to work and go to school and go to college and just be free, But then again, like Haya said, there is so much prejudice that is just sort of so deeply internalized that I'm sure a lot of people aren't even aware that they have these sort of deeply harmful views on things. And I'm sure it's been really challenging, especially when you're sort of working on projects like these.
There are challenges whenever you're trying to change things in the society. There are always people, there are naysayers, there are people who put roadblocks, there are people who actively work against the projects on social media and other platforms. But there's a point in everyone's life in which you realize that no equation is same. So, for example, Pakistan, we've been struggling with these kind of discussions and debates since 1947.
Yes.
And we have been there have been countless shows on it. There have been countless debates. There have been countless seminars. Millions of dollars have been spent, foreign money on seminars and things like that, which haven't changed anything on the ground. So there comes a point in which you say that enough of the debates, and if you cannot fill an already full glass. So if somebody is going to think about something and they have made up their mind about it, it's better not to engage them and just do the project and just bring it on the ground and just show it to them that this is how it will work. And women have the same capacity and the same rights as men do in the Constitution of Pakistan. And if they choose and to refuse it, that's their problem. We still will march on and we will still do the projects which will actually change things on the ground. So that's the point in which we decide to do these projects. And when we hear, the objections around it, when we hear, especially Women on Wheels or, other projects that we have done. So our women, when they take on the street and when they're trained and when they're confident, so that is a loud enough an answer that can, silence any critic. We can sit here and debate for hours. I can tell you right now, if you bring someone on the panel who is an active worker against women's rights, they will sit here till dawn and till the next dusk and debate and come with all sorts of ideologies to prove you wrong. But the moment you walk out of the studio and they see a woman riding a motorbike, that answer is way more powerful than any other discussion that we can have. So at SSF, the Samansuri Foundation, that's exactly why we just focus on projects. And, just like, Ms. Hari was talking about the helpline. So these kind of projects and the way Shirkat does, projects. So these are the things which can bring real change into society. Otherwise, you can open your Twitter or Facebook right now. Everyone is just debating, but nobody is putting some action where it should be to change things. So I think we should stop debating these people, and we should just prove it with our actions that enough is enough, and now women will have the public space. Women will have the opportunity to work if they want to. They will marry if they want to. If they don't want to marry, they don't have to marry. So all of these debates need to just go into the practical sphere right now.
You're making me sort of run off set with my sleeves rolled up and be like, action! We're going to take a very quick break at this juncture. Stay with us. We'll be back in a flash to resume this excellent conversation. Stay with us. Welcome back to the coffee table, where we are having an absolutely fantastic conversation about violence and gender-based violence, and how even now, in this day and age, we are still having to have permutations, same conversation over and over again. And it's getting quite frustrating. We are in conversation with Salman Sufi from the Salman Sufi Foundation, with Haya Iman Zahid, who is the CEO of the Legal Aid Society, and Amina Rahman, who is a program coordinator at Shirkatgah. Haya, before the break, we were talking about reporting. And I know that there are many really sensible sounding, comprehensive bills and acts, and we have a legal structure that seems to be well-intentioned, and it seems like they mean business, right? But then there's clearly a gap between having well-intentioned and comprehensive legislation to protect women and children and girls and transgender people and vulnerable groups with action on the ground. So what do you think is happening? Why is there still such a gap between law and action and the implementation of that law?
I think we have too many pro-women laws. And I think the PTI government, end of 2020, came out with 2 further ordinances, the Anti-Rape and Trial Investigation Ordinance and the Criminal Law Amendment Ordinance. And whilst the recent spate of laws did some good in expanding the definition of rape, I think that they created too many structures and may cause further complications and have to a large extent centralized power with the office of the Prime Minister. Whereas, I think provinces should have been given more autonomy. Right. Also, they weren't very mindful of the existing setup. There's talk of new gender-based violence courts, but these already existed. So there was nothing novel done. Right. So again, the question is, we have so many laws, but we don't have systematic implementation. Yes. So I feel that the government's focus needs to be on ensuring that when a new law is passed, it comes out in tandem with the rules that are needed to operationalize it. And secondly, it must be followed shortly after with an action plan, a costed, budgeted roadmap with timelines, responsibilities, short-term, mid-term, and long-term targets. Sindh has done this to some extent recently with the Sexual Violence Response Framework. It's a 5-year roadmap which brings together all departments. But again, we haven't seen much progress, but there is talk now of a task force being nominated in the office of the Chief Secretary that will do a quarterly stock take. So, you need the consistent push and follow up. And it's not just the job of civil society and activists to be coming. There has to be government machinery that takes stock of implementation. So if law, just creating a law and then publicizing it, achieves actually nothing at the grassroots level. Absolutely. And the thing is that, do you think that it also sort of emboldens potential violent people because they think that, well, we can get away with it because the law is so complex and nothing really seems to happen. So, carry on. I mean, I think that a lot of the reasons why this is happening is because of this entitlement and this perception that we will get away with it. Yeah. We are based on misogyny or, orthodox concepts of this feudal mindset or just male superiority and privilege. And the idea that systems are too complex, victims and survivors will not have the financial means or the confidence or will simply lack that legal awareness to be able to take their cases forward. And we don't have enough examples of swift justice. We have examples of high-profile cases, such as the case of Zainab bin Qassoor, in which the perpetrator did receive the death sentence, but that was only in 2018. What impact did the severity of punishment have on all the cases that we're now talking about right now at shows such as this? So we need to reorient the optics from severity of punishment and action in high-profile cases towards certainty of punishment, finality of punishment, and ensuring that in every case there is expedited and swift justice delivered, which is what the law mandates, a judgment within, an order within 3 to 4 months. 3 to 4 months, that's what the law says. Yeah. Yes, Amina, you wanted to in?
Yeah, so I agree with what Haya says, and I, with the attitude. But I think, there are certain things within the law that we also need to look at. Right. So we're talking about police and when women go to the police station, compromise on something. Yeah. And
this is a family matter and you should resolve it, within the family.
Matter. Exactly. And I think that is sort of facilitated in the law right now as well, right? Like because you have compromises on different crimes, including murder right now in your law. And I think that needs to change. And I think while we recognize, that some of our laws are good, we also should recognize that there is space for improvement. And this is an attitudinal shift that our lawmakers also need to look at, that, certain crimes should not be something that people should be compromising on. And I think, adding on to the point that Haya said earlier, that there definitely needs to be political will behind the laws, right? Like, so our 4 provinces right now have some sort of domestic violence law in place, right? But do we have the political will and commitment in terms of, having notified the special mechanisms or structures that those laws call for, right? The rules of business are not in place. We do not have a budget for those implementing things to happen, right? For instance, the Punjab 2016 Women Protection Act specifies that, you need a special center, out of which from 2016 to now, we only have 1 functional. So that's not working out. Similarly, I think there's been some traction, but the 2013 domestic violence law in Sindh, and then 2014 subsequently in Balochistan, we don't have the supporting structures. We don't have the protection committees in place. And we definitely need that. And that is political will. That is demand also, but there needs to be political will. It's not enough to just pass the legislation. You need that.
Quite right. It's a sort of an appeasement. It's the same, I feel like it's almost appeasement in the same vein as saying hang a rapist, or, that kind of punitive approach where, of course, there must be accountability and, of course, there must be punishment. But it seems like a Band-Aid, a temporary sort of measure at that moment to kind of, sort of assuage a lot of guilty consciences or feel like justice has been done. But then underneath, and like Haya said, you can't just sort of have some one-off high-profile case, but then underneath there's a consistent stream of people who are experiencing an unsafe, violent situation almost every day of their lives. And Salman, tell me a little bit here about the Violence Against Women Center that I know that you helped set up. And I think that that's a good example of how good things can happen when all the cogs sort of come together and there's sort of less red tape to have to deal with.
There's always red tape. It comes to even in government or even in private sector. But as Mina was saying, the only reason I was able to convince the government for the Violence Against Women Center was a political will. If the political will of that time, the Chief Minister, Mr. Sharif, he used to be just a message away whenever I was presenting these ideas. So whenever you have a person on top who's interested in such initiatives, things happen very fast.
So center, I was really looking at the website, and the center was able to resolve over 3,000 cases over the course of 2 years, which is fantastic. So do you think that because it was a system that worked, it gave a lot of women confidence and courage to come forward and report and try to do something about their situation?
See, I want to raise a point here. We were talking about social media in the center, so I'm going to try to connect for the audience to try to understand why these centers are important.
Yes.
The point is right now, everything we were talking about, Ms. Hayal was talking about the Zainab case and all those cases. These cases got traction because of the social media.
Yes.
There's always an officer available who sees the opportunity. They see that some case is available on the social media, it's getting the traction. Then they start to work on it because they know that they're going to get that recognition that they need if they resolve the case. That is the wrong approach, because not everyone has the ability to go on social media and be a tech-savvy tweeter or a tech-savvy person to write about their issues. So most of the cases stay in the cold storage because we don't have the capacity to go on the social media like most people do. So that's why when we open the center, the fear of the center in itself that there is this place in which there's all women who are stationed. The police is there, the prosecutor is there, the forensics is there, the psychologist is there. So that fear created this narrative that now women have a place to go to where they're not going to sit in front of a male SHO who's going to just tell them that, oh, this is your domestic issue, so just go back home. They're going to go sit in front of a woman who knows your problems, who understands your problem given the fabric of the society, and is going to help you resolve those problems. So that is why we need to get off from this social media hype, and we need to create structures on the ground in which any person from any background can just walk in and get their issue resolved. They don't have to resort to social media. So this is, social media is a good tool to advocate things, but it shouldn't become the only tool in which women or minorities have to use to get justice.
No, I think that is crucial, really. And I think that's a really, really important point that you've raised. But Haya, tell me a little bit about attrition also, because I am quite sort of interested in that. And from what I understand, it means that you've reported and your case is underway, but then your trial just kind of falls apart because people back out. And that's also something that is, I'm sure, demoralizing and a deterrent for women to report or to take their case forward.
We at the Legal Aid Society have recently done some research. We've analyzed 50 rape trials, which resulted in acquittals, which meant that those suspected were let off. And we tried to understand what the reasons were. In over 50% of those cases, we saw that the reason recorded was that the witnesses changed their statement or their mind, or turned hostile, or that the complainant backed off. Which then means that the complainant fabricated this. But what we fail to understand are the roadblocks that the complainants, the survivors, face at each juncture. Just the journey to get the FIR registered in itself is laden with familial barriers. There is stigma. As I mentioned earlier, the law says it should take 4 months. Our data indicates that it takes 16 to 18 months. So to have that courage for 16 to 18 months and to bear all sorts of pressure. So when we speak of attrition, it is prior to reporting due to societal factors, economic, financial issues. And when the case actually starts proceeding.
What do we do? What are the conversations that we need to keep having, or do we need to change our approach? I really sometimes at a sort of loss for words, because on the one hand, it seems so clear and obvious that aggression against somebody who's vulnerable and weaker than you is clearly a terrible thing to do, and you're a horrible person if you do that. And yet, it's increasing. And around the world, it's increasing. And I'm really sometimes at a sort of loss.
I understand completely where you're coming from. But I think, and I think sometimes, when we have these discussions, we always sort of point out the issues and the problems, and we don't sometimes highlight our successes. And I think for us, especially when we look at it, we think about it in terms simply as advocacy. You have to do advocacy at every level. You have to do advocacy really at the family level, at the grassroots, at the village, at your union council, then, with your lawmakers. So it is really advocacy at every level. And it's really thinking about, mindset shift. I remember when we go into the communities in certain cases and we're talking about, violence, and these women are also sometimes conditioned to say, oh, if our husband doesn't beat us, how do we know that he loves us, So this kind of conditioning is also a problem. So a rewiring of thinking of what we're doing. And,
normalized.
Internalized. And I think, and that internalization needs to change. When we talk about gender roles, those need to change. We recently ran a campaign on, we said, we're always talking about issues. We wanted people to imagine what a violence-free family would look like, right? How would they see it? How would they envision a role for themselves in that violence-free families? Is it going to school? Is it getting your birth registration? Is it your ID cards? Is it getting your share? Is it allowed to be going to your friend's house safely?
Absolutely,
right? So I think all of those changes in mobility levels at just our community level needs to change. The way we are having these conversations, it's not enough to just have conversations on TV about high profile cases, about how we're having those conversations. What is the language that we're employing? That needs to happen. And I think even at the, engagement at the policy level, things are improving. We have all of these legislations. We have specialized laws, for instance, now in 4 provinces about domestic violence. So that's definitely an improvement. Shelters used to be so scarce, but now at least in Punjab, every district has a shelter. Functioning can be improved. Similarly, even I think Haya can come in on this, and they are working on, making SOPs. Legislation and courts are improving. We've had judgments from the Lahore High Court about, how to deal with medical legal, and that is an improvement. So, and, we've had successes with regards to family law and consent, and a higher judiciary. I wish it was truer, with the lower judiciary, but the higher judiciary has given us, seminal judgments on consent and improvement. And I think those things need to be told to people. And I think, that public awareness campaign of, what we're thinking. We talk about, violence and cruelty. Well, we've had these, maybe we've had specialized, we've had this since, the Constitution actually came into place. We have this in the PPC.
Like Salman said, in 94, we've been having conversations since the beginning. Yeah. So, Salman, this is something that I always ask, when having these kind of conversation on the show, and we have men weighing in on the conversation, what is the role of the male ally when it comes to the advocacy work that Amina has been talking about?
Support. The least you can do is just stop explaining the rights and just understand the roles that they have and the roles they want to take on in the society, and just support them. And also, start from your own, surroundings. Give rights to your daughters. Let them take the decision of what they want. If they want an education, let them have the education to as whatever extent they want to have it. If they want to go get a job, let them actually provide them. Don't discourage them because things are bad, things are happening outside, but there are good things happening outside as well. So facilitate their journey from being your dependent to an independent woman. So these are the very small steps that every household can take. I'm not going to request them to take anything big or start a project because not everyone has the capacity to do that. So, but if everyone who's listening or who's watching can just take one small step of, advocating and supporting the women around them to become independent, so that will change a lot of things on the ground.
Absolutely. And I'm really glad that because it doesn't take a massive grand gesture to start change. And thank you so much, Salman and Haya and Amina, for being with me today on the show. And really, we've only, I think, scratched the surface of this conversation, but it's a conversation that we need to keep scratching at. And it's crucial to remember that when we talk about gender-based violence, or we talk about violence against women and minorities and vulnerable groups, we are talking not only about physical, when you beat someone, for example. We're talking about the whole definition, it's so complex. We're talking about not being allowed to work. We're talking about being policed about where you go, restrictions on your movement, about not having access to your own money, about being bilked of your inheritance. Violence is not just physically going out and slapping people around. It is incredibly complex, and it is so deeply woven into the way that we operate as a society that it's going to take a lot of self-introspection, and a lot of thought, and a lot of positive change, and a genuine desire to sort of to think about these things and where do we stand on these issues. It's not enough to say, oh, let's hang a rapist, because that doesn't solve anything. Advocacy begins at home. Reach out, talk to your family, talk to your friends, speak up when something is wrong, speak up when you know something wrong and something bad is happening. Speak up on social media, do your research, do your reading, don't just blindly follow what people are saying, because the only way to make this world a safer place, not just for women, but for children and for trans people and for anybody who is different, is only if we do not let this continue. And it has to be on an individual level, because that's how we form a collective. Thank you so much for watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time on The Coffee Table. Bye.